dark matter. She mentioned this to David. They probably leave while you're not watching. People go to work, go to the shops. You can't watch the street all day. I'm near the window all day, she said. You're working. You're not watching. This was reasonable. She accepted it. She started watching. She felt guilty about this. She felt the specific guilt of someone who was being paranoid about their wonderful neighbors who had brought them wine and honey and remembered everything they said. She felt the guilt and she watched anyway because something was pulling at her that she could not name. She watched for 3 days. Nobody left. Not for work, not for shopping, not for any of the ordinary reasons people left their homes during the day. She saw them in their gardens, and she saw them walking between houses, and she saw them at their windows, sometimes at their windows looking out at the close, at the quiet cul-de-sac with its 7 houses and its central garden and its new arrivals at number 14. Story 6. Speak. It started with her mother's coffee cup. Ellie had been going through her mother's kitchen 3 days after the funeral. The specific, necessary awfulness of sorting through a dead person's things, of making the decisions that death required, and she had picked up the cup from the drying rack beside the sink. Her mother had washed it the morning she died. It was the last thing she had washed. It was sitting in the drying rack the way it had been sitting in the drying rack every morning of Ellie's childhood. Her mother washed the cup immediately after breakfast, set it to dry. It was dry by lunch and back in the cupboard. This was the rhythm of her mother's mornings for 60 years. Ellie picked it up to put it in the box for the charity shop. She heard her mother say, "I love you, Ellie. Be good." Not a memory, not the internal echo of a familiar voice, a sound, external, present, coming from the cup. The last sound the cup had absorbed, the last thing her mother had said before she set the cup in the drying rack and went to sit in her chair and did not get up again. Ellie set the cup down very carefully. She stood in her mother's kitchen for a long time. She picked up a dish towel. She heard her mother singing, an old song, something Ellie did not know the name of, the specific wordless humming of someone doing ordinary tasks. She set the dish towel down. She stood in the kitchen with her hands at her sides, and she understood what had happened, and she did not know what to do with the understanding. She left the kitchen. She drove home. She did not touch anything in her car except the steering wheel and the gear shift, and she understood in the drive home that this was going to be a problem. Everything had last sounds. Everything that had been owned by someone who had died while owning it had absorbed the last sound made in its presence and would release that sound to whoever held it next. This was not a gift. She understood this in the driveway of her house, sitting in the car with her hands on the steering wheel, listening to the last thing the previous owner of the car had said before selling it. Something mundane about the price, a conversation with a dealer, nothing frightening. That one was fine. Not all of them were going to be fine. She sat in the car and she made rules. She would not touch old things. She would not touch things from estate sales or antique shops or charity shops. She would not touch things that had belonged to people who were dead without knowing what she was touching. She would be careful. She was careful for 3 weeks. Then her husband James, her husband who did not know about any of this, who she had not told because she did not know how to tell him, her husband came home with a box of his grandmother's things. His grandmother had died the previous month. The family had been going through the house. He set the box on the kitchen table. He said he had to make a call and he went into the study. Ellie looked at the box. She did not touch it. She looked at the box for 20 minutes while James made his call. Then she touched the box. She heard a woman, James's grandmother, a woman she had met twice. She heard her saying things that she should not have been hearing, things that James's grandmother had said in the privacy of her own home to the box that was now on Ellie's kitchen table, and that had absorbed every sound made in its presence during its long life. Not all of them were the last things. Some objects held more than one. She set the box down. James came back from the study. He looked at her. "You okay?" he said. She looked at him. She looked at his wedding ring. She looked at his wedding ring because she had just thought about it, had just understood that his wedding ring was an old object, was an heirloom, his grandmother's wedding ring resized for his finger. His grandfather's ring, she had been told, the grandfather who had died in 1987. She looked at the ring. She thought about what 1987 had contained, about the things said in the presence of that ring over the years since 1987, about the last things said in its presence before it had come to James's finger. She thought about whether she wanted to know. She looked at James. She thought about his grandmother's box and what she had heard from it. She had heard things James's grandmother had said in privacy, things that changed the shape of the family's history in ways that James did not know. She thought about whether she wanted to hear what was in the ring. She thought about all the objects in her house, all the heirlooms and the inherited furniture and the things that belonged to people who were gone. She thought about what they contained, what sounds they absorbed, what they were waiting to tell her. She looked at James. She thought about his mother's earrings that she wears sometimes, about the bracelet from her own grandmother. She thought about the shape of a life lived among objects that held the sounds of the dead. "I'm fine," she said. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about her mother's coffee cup on the drying rack in the house she still needed to clear out. "I love you, Ellie. Be good." She thought about going back for the cup, about keeping it, about being able to hold her mother's last words whenever she needed to. She thought about the other things in the house, about the sounds they held, about what her mother had said in the privacy of her own home, in her own kitchen, over a lifetime, in the presence of everything she owned. She thought about whether she wanted all of that, whether she could carry all of that. She looked at the ceiling of her bedroom. She looked at the lamp on the bedside table. The lamp had been her mother's. She turned it off without touching the base, only touching the switch, only the part that was definitely hers and not her mother's. She lay in the dark. She thought about the wedding ring on James's finger. She thought about it for a long time. Then she reached over in the dark and she took his hand. She held it. She waited. The ring was warm from his skin. She waited. And then she heard it, the last thing said in the presence of the ring, before it came to James, before it was resized, when it was still his grandfather's. She heard the last sound, the very last one, and it was not words. It was breathing, the slow and labored breathing of someone who was almost gone. And underneath it, James's grandmother's voice, young and desperate in the way of someone who is too young to understand why people leave. "Please don't go. Please don't go. I'm not ready." Ellie held James's hand in the dark. She did not let go. She listened to the ghost of a young woman begging someone to stay. She thought about her mother's cup. She thought about, "I love you, Ellie. Be good." She thought about what it meant that the last thing her mother, the very last thing with no one else in the room, talking to no one, talking to the cup and the drying rack and the morning kitchen, was that, was love, was instruction. She held James's hand. She listened to his grandfather breathing his last. She thought about what it meant that everything held something, that the world was full of last things, that you could carry them if you were careful, that they would break you if you were not. She closed her eyes. She tried to sleep. Next time on Dark Matter. May looked at him. "What happens when you have the count?" she asked. He looked at her. He did not answer immediately. He looked at her with those pale indoor eyes, and he held the smile in place, and he said, "We verify the total against the expected number." He paused. "Sometimes the numbers don't match. Sometimes there are more than we expect." He paused again. "Sometimes there are fewer." May looked at him. "And if there are fewer," she said. He wrote something in the ledger. "We adjust," he said. He moved on to the next house. May watched him go. She went inside. She called her neighbor, Roy, who was 58 and practical, and she told him about the census taker. Roy said, "What did he look like?" She described him. Roy was quiet for a moment. He said, "My grandfather mentioned someone like that. Came through in 1962. Coat that was too old. A ledger." May said, "What happened in 1962? Roy said 3 people died that winter, more than the winters before. His grandfather had always thought it was connected." May looked out her window. She could see Mr. Fell on the road, moving from house to house, his leather case, his clipboard, his ledger.
Please like and subscribe.